Hey, what's going on, guys? And welcome to the September 2020 coaching video for Proverbs XXX Club. My name is Billy Mills. I am the president and founder of Proverbs XXX Club. And if I haven't had the opportunity to meet you yet, I look forward to connecting with you at a club meeting soon. To everyone who is watching a coaching video for the first time, I want to welcome you. And to everybody else, welcome back. Hope everything is going well. I hope you are fighting. And not only finding freedom and victory, but just the fact that you're fighting. Don't give up, no matter what happened this week, no matter what happened today, no matter what happened last month, or anything that's in the past. I want to encourage you to keep fighting. Your life is worth it, your soul's worth it, your family's worth it, and more than anything else, the glory of God, which really is at stake in our fight. It's worth it. So I just want to remind you that at the beginning of this month as we get started. Couple things as we get started this month. As always, make sure you've got a Bible with you. I prefer a paper Bible for a couple reasons. Number one, you may be watching this on your phone, so it may be difficult to go back and forth between your app or your computer screen. Have a copy of God's Word, no matter which format it is. Always have a copy in front of you as you're going through this. Make sure you got a pencil, pen, paper, journal, something to write some things down with. Things that trigger your mind or your heart. I want to encourage you to write those down. Notes for yourself, reminders for yourself, things to meditate on, things to think about throughout the week. Make sure you write those things down each and every week, and don't ever forget what we're doing, what the purpose is of our brotherhood, what the purpose is of the club meetings, what the purpose is of the coaching videos. We're training ourselves as we make war on sin, as we make war on passivity, as we make war on laziness. And now on to our coaching for this month, which is coming from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. Let me read it for us. The Apostle Paul says this: "When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways." And so in the text, I want to point out this month the simple fact that there is a battle going on. There's a battle going on not only in our lives, there's a battle going on not only in the world around us, physical battles, spiritual battles, mental and emotional battles, but we see even in the text that there's a battle going on between some things. There's several elements to this battle. The first I want you to see is this: it's being versus becoming. Being versus becoming. I like to think about this as the battle of when. Paul says this: when I was versus when I became. When I was in the past versus when I became and I continue to be now in the present. Think about this. Being is easy. Being is easy. It's easier to be than it is to become. It's easier to be than become. Being doesn't take work. Becoming does. Children, think about this, don't have to do anything to be children. They just are. But children have to do lots of things to become men. Being is easier than becoming. Say whatever you want, think whatever you want, reason however you want. You're a child. People will treat you as such. See how much easier it is to be a child or to be anything than to become something else. He says in the text, when I was a child, I spoke like a child. It's the Greek word laleo. It simply means to speak or to say. 1 Corinthians 3:1, "But I, brothers, could not address you as spiritual people, but as people of the flesh, as infants in Christ." When we are children, we speak like children. If you think about childhood, or if you think about babies learning how to speak when they're little, it's all ba, 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 ball, 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 da, 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 dad, dad. We learn how to speak. We start with simple things. We start with sounds, and then we're able to move on to more difficult words, which start to become expressions, and then we learn figures of speech and parts of speech, and we start to speak and we start to reason. It's becoming clear that we're growing. It's becoming clear that we're progressing and we're growing up. And so there's a difference between how a child speaks and how an older child speaks, or how an adolescent speaks, or how as an adult speaks, or eventually how a man speaks. So there's a different level of speaking. He goes on and says, not only did I speak like a child, I thought like a child. And this is the Greek word phroneo. In Matthew 16:23, we see this. Jesus says, he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are a hindrance to me, for you're not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of men." That Greek word phroneo, to set the mind, to think, to reason in such a way. And Jesus is telling Peter to literally get behind him because Peter was in his way, keeping him from accomplishing the task that God had given him to accomplish. And the reason that Peter was in his way was because Peter had placed his mind on earthly things. Peter had placed his mind on safeguarding Jesus' life, on keeping him from suffering, on keeping him from going to the cross. And so Jesus, understanding that it was absolutely necessary to go to the cross, said, "Peter, you need to get behind me because you've placed your thinking, you've placed your mind on something that's getting in the way." Romans 8:5 says this. It says, "For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit." This is where, really for us as men, the war is won or lost. What are we setting our minds on? What are we thinking about? What are we meditating on? What are we concentrating on? Lust is an issue for most of us because we've had unhindered access to our mind harem our entire lives. That mind harem is the place that I'd like to describe to people, is the place where you take women in your thoughts. Whether it's a teenage girl you saw for the first time, or it's a pornographic image when you were a young man, or you're just doing the ordinary lusting, something triggers your mind and you go to that place and you think about that person, you think about whatever that satisfying thought, image, or action is. You're literally taking your mind there. You're setting your mind there. And sometimes it's amazing to see how people are surprised that they did something in their flesh, they did something with their body, they did something in their life that they were first thinking about and meditating on in their mind. And so the war is either won or lost in our minds. And the Apostle Paul says, when I was a child, I thought like a child. I thought about things that children think about. I thought about doing things that children do. I thought about being things that children are. I thought about wanting things that children want. There's a difference between a child's thinking and a man's thinking. Romans 12:3, he says this a few chapters later, "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned." So again, don't think of yourself as holier, as more mature, as more advanced than you ought to think. Think sober thoughts. Think humble thoughts about yourself. These are the things that men do. These are the things that children don't do because they're more concerned about being something than just becoming something. When we're not concerned about advancing, maturing, getting better at something, we just think about whatever makes us happy, whatever feels good, whatever sounds good, whatever is good in the moment. That's the things that we indulge in. That's the things that we use to satisfy those longings and cravings. We think about those things. We say those things. And we place our mind literally on those things, and that's where we get into trouble. It's the same word in Colossians 3:2. Set your minds on things above and not on things on the earth. If you want to get past a lot of the struggles, the frustrations, the temptations, and the failures that you have when it comes to lust, you've got to stop thinking and meditating and going there in your mind as consistently as you do. You've established patterns, you've established habits of thinking. And in order to grow up, in order to become something else, you can't think like a child. So he spoke like a child, he thought like a child. He also says, I reasoned like a child. This is the Greek word logizomai. It's close to where we would get our word for logic. It's a way of thinking and processing information. It's a way of meditating on things and seeing the world around us. It's really our worldview. Romans 2:3 says this, "Do you suppose, O man, you who judge those who practice such things and yet do them yourself, that you will escape the judgment of God?" Do you suppose? In your thinking and your logic and your way of processing information, you think that you can escape judgment when you yourself judge people who do the same things that you're doing? The problem here is children's rationale. As a parent, sometimes I have to correct my kids. And sometimes it's just downright funny as I'm sort of breaking things down for them and helping them think through what they were doing. And almost inevitably will come the question, like, what were you thinking? And we start to work through it. And when they understand the folly of their ways, sometimes they smile, sometimes they laugh, because it's clear that they were reasoning like a child. They weren't thinking through things clearly. They didn't really have a sound logic in how they were approaching the situation. And so when we talk about being versus becoming, there's ways that we can be. Thinking, reasoning, and speaking like children, because we're not concerned with becoming. However, becoming is intentional. Becoming is hard work. The word is ginomai. It literally means to arise or appear in history, to come upon the stage. It literally speaks of men as they're appearing in public for the first time. It's a literal coming of age. I remember as a child, I couldn't wait to get a knife, right? I wanted a knife of my own, but I didn't just want a pocket knife. I wanted this like giant Bowie knife, hunting knife that my dad had. And I remember I think I probably got it on my 13th birthday, and I thought I was amazing. I thought I was a man. I thought I was a badass because I had this huge knife. Granted, I never carried the knife. I never used the knife. I never did anything with the knife. To this day, probably 25 to 30 years later, the knife's hanging on my wall. I've never taken it hunting. I've never gone anywhere in public with the knife. I just wanted it. I considered having a knife like that as a sign of manhood. So I couldn't wait to get my hands on that knife, because to me it was a signaling that I was growing up. It was some kind of sign for the world that I was a man now because I had this knife. And sadly, we don't always pass the torch to young men in our culture. Sadly, there's no marker in life that we can go back to and say, that was the moment I became a man. And you know what else is interesting? When we look at the phrase, when I was a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child, I spoke like a child, but when I became a man, the word become, it's an active, perfect indicative. When you look at the actual grammar structure of the verb, it's active, which means the subject is performing the action. I'm doing the becoming. So it's not passive. Someone's not doing the becoming for me, but it's I'm active in this. I'm becoming a man. It's perfect, which means it's an action completely completed in the past, but it's good for all time. I don't have to go back and become again. Once I become, it's good for the rest of my life. It's in the perfect tense, and it's indicative, which simply means it's a simple statement of fact. And so I like to think of it like this: becoming perfect. One day I'm going to have a t-shirt that says becoming perfect, and people will ask what it means, and I'll take them back to 1 Corinthians 13:11. It's that decisive moment in my life when I decide, reason, think, and eventually say to myself, I'm not going to be a child anymore. I'm going to become a man. Becoming perfect. Perfection here means completed in the past, once and for all, not needing to be repeated. Think about the Greek word in the scriptures, tetelestai. This is what Jesus said on the cross. In English, we translate it, it is finished. Jesus didn't need to die again. He didn't need to go back and do anything else to complete the work that God had sent him to do. His work of substitutionary atonement, the propitiation, removing of the wrath of God, it was finished once and for all. Being is easier than becoming. The battle of when. The next battle we see is the battle of child versus man. The Greek words nepios versus aner. This is what I like to call is the battle of what. The first was a battle of when, being versus becoming. Now it's the battle of what? It's literally the difference between being a child and being a man. The Greek word here is nepios. It's an adjective which means an infant, a little child, a minor who is not yet of age. And the significance of it is not only someone who's childish, but literally someone who is unskilled and untaught. That's what I think of when I think of children. It's not just an age thing. It's the fact that they're unskilled in the art of being, acting like, and living like a man. They have yet to be taught how to be a man. And that's really what the purpose of childhood is. And especially for young boys, it's the responsibility of fathers to teach them, to educate them, to skill them in the art of being a man. And that's a process that the verb in the text says is becoming. Becoming is that process from birth until adulthood, where we're literally going through and learning the ropes, learning the attitudes, learning the ways to speak, the ways to act, the places to act in certain ways. We're learning how to become men. And it's the responsibilities of our fathers, our grandfathers, our community around us, our culture, even the church, to teach these most important lessons. Children talk, think, and reason like children, and therefore are treated as children. Men say not what they want to say, but they say what needs to be said. Men think not whatever they want, but they think about the consequences of their actions. And men reason with themselves before acting, and therefore end up being respected as men. It's all about self-control. It's not thinking and saying the first thing that comes to your mind. It's thinking about and reasoning and really weighing the consequences of every thought, every action, everything we do, think, and say has to be thought about, meditated on, and even prayed through before we act. That's what it's like to be a man. And that is an art. That is a skill that has to be taught, has to be developed. It's something that we have to learn how to do, and then we put it into practice. Then it becomes a habit. And then at that moment in our lives, that season that we're learning to do these things, and then actually are successful at doing those things, that's that moment, that's the passing of the torch, that's the season of life where we become a man, when we start acting and doing things differently. 1 Corinthians 16:13 says this: be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Act like men. It's plain in the text, because there's a difference between acting like a man and acting like a child. I'm sure you have heard someone say at some time, usually a woman, usually in disdain, usually in unbelief almost, and a little bit disrespectful, speaking of a man or speaking of a friend, maybe a husband or someone, that they're acting like children, or he's just acting like a child. And what they're saying in that moment is there's clearly a difference between the way that children act and the way men act. There's a difference between the way children think and the way men think. There's a difference between the way children speak and the way men speak. It's all about the process of becoming. So it's the battle of when I was a child versus when I became a man. It's the battle of what? The childlikeness or the manliness. And then not only that, but in this season of becoming perfect, since we've become perfect, what we do is we trade in the toys for tools. The text says that Paul gave up childish ways. In other words, he relinquished them and he didn't go back to pick them up. The Greek word is katergeo. It means to render idle, to make something unemployed, inactive, or inoperative. To deprive something of force, influence, and power. To cause something to cease, to put an end to it, to do away with, to annul it, to abolish it. And here's my favorite definition, maybe ever. It means to terminate all intercourse with. We put away childish things. We turn in the toys and we pick up the tools. We leave childlikeness behind and we embrace manliness. We leave acting like a child. We embrace acting like a man. We leave speaking like a child. We embrace speaking like a man. We leave reasoning like a child, and we fully accept the responsibility of reasoning like men. We terminate all intercourse with childish ways. We terminate all intercourse with childish things. We're not children. We don't go back and pick up childish ways. The Bible says, flee youthful lusts. These things that we're fighting, men, some of us are fighting in our 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. These are the things that teenagers and 20-somethings should be fighting with more so than men should be fighting with. There's that season of life where it's almost expected and understood that there's going to be certain battles in our life because of our age alone. But there also should be a season of life where certain things shouldn't have the same power and sway over us that they used to have, because we're no longer children. We're no longer adolescents. We're no longer teenagers. We're men now. And there comes a time in our life when we have given these things up and we don't keep going back to pick them back up. Let me say it like this. Stop having intercourse with certain things in your life, like toys, childish things. This might get me in a little bit of trouble with some of you. Video games. Come on. Stop having intercourse with them. Stop having intercourse with yourself. And then hear this correctly. Stop being a pedophile. Stop being a pedophile. Now, wait a second. Now we've gone somewhere completely different. But when we hear the word pedophilia or being a pedophile, our culture rightly thinks and understands that a pedophile is someone who has physical or sexual attraction to a child, and typically is someone who has done some kind of action, sexual action against a child. And that's what our cultural understanding of a pedophile is. But if you look at the word itself in Greek or Latin, it simply is two words together, paidos, which child or childish or childlike, and phileo, which is the word for love. So it's to love children, or it's also to love childish things. And so there's an element of pedophilia that men in our culture are guilty of, because it's a love of childish ways. It's a love of childish things. It's a always wanting to have our toys and not wanting to pick up tools. It's always wanting to have the freedom to act like children instead of acting like men. There comes a time in our life when we must become men. We put those things away. We don't pick them up again. Luke 22:36, Jesus says this, "And let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one." There was a new season of life that was coming for the followers of Jesus, and they were going to need swords. And Jesus says, if you don't have a sword, sell your coat and buy a sword. Well, it's the same thing for us, man. There's tools that need to be in our hands, not toys, and certainly not our own junk. We need to grow up. We need to move on into adulthood. We need to embrace manhood. We need to become men. One of the things that disturbs me is if you look at all the studies done on pornography, or even the reports done for pornographic websites, one of the most searched for words every single year is teen. We have grown men that are typing in this word so that we can fantasize about having sex with young women. We have these fantasies of sleeping with young women. Guys, it's time to grow up. Enough of the pedophilia, enough of the childish ways, enough of the childish attractions, enough of the childish desires, enough of the childish speaking, the childish thinking, the childish reasoning. It's time to become men. And once we become men, we don't turn back to childish ways. So here are some practical and tactical applications for us this week, this month, things that I want you to think about. And I don't care if you're 18 or 28 or 38 or 48 or 58 or 68. Here's some practical advice. Don't be a pedophile. Put away childish things as well as childish desires. Number 2, Invest in tools, not toys. Be honest with yourself. There are probably some things in your life that you need to give up. I don't know, fantasy football, golf, video games, professional wrestling. I don't know. Whatever it is that's keeping you from acting, thinking, and living like a man, it's time to get rid of those things. What are some of the tools that you can invest in? I'm talking about simple things. Whether it's a basic tool kit that they sell around Christmas time, this 115-piece toolkit, whether it's a hammer, a screwdriver, a level, there's certain things that you need to have in your garage. For me, I feel like I always have to drive a truck because somebody always needs something to be moved. You need to have a shovel, you need to have a rake. I think you need to have a chainsaw. I think you need to have a blower and a trimmer. All these tools. Listen, invest in things over time so that you have them when you need them, not just for yourself, but for others. Invest in tools. It's indicative of the stage of life that you're in when you invest more time and money in tools than toys. And I'm just as guilty as anybody because I want 5 motorcycles. I don't need 5 motorcycles. Maybe I need a 4-wheeler, but probably don't need 5 motorcycles. I certainly don't need a boat. I'm not saying you don't need a boat. I'm not saying it's a sin to have a boat, but I am saying if you're spending every weekend on the boat instead of raising your kids, that's a problem. The boat's become a toy, not a tool. And acquire new skills, practical skills, whether it's learning how to change the oil, fish, gut a fish, clean a fish, hunt, field dress a deer or a hog, learning how to shoot, learning how to defend yourself and your family, learning how to build something, learning how to cook, learning how to grill. Listen, acquire a new skill. So don't forget, here's the top 3, practical and tactical this week, this month. Don't be a pedophile. Put away childish things. Put away childish desires. That's number 1. Number 2, invest in tools, not toys. And number 3, acquire new skills. Find somebody to teach you, train you, mentor you in the art of becoming a man. And once you become a man, realize this, you have become perfect. That's all we got for now. I hope this month was a challenge and an encouragement and a blessing. I look forward to seeing you guys at the next Proverbs XXX Club meeting. If you need something in the meantime, feel free to hit me up or check out the resources on our website at proverbsxxxclub.com.